Often when we're building a tabular data model, we import data from a SQL relational database, but sometimes we pull data from other places. So we're going to look at one of the places we can get data from, and that is SharePoint. So if we take a look at this SharePoint site, we have a lot of different content types and lists and so on. So one of the lists in this SharePoint site is a list of US stores, and we can see it has about 4,000 stores in this list. And if we look through it, we have the columns we have: store number, address, city, state, zip, store hours. So this is potentially something that is maintained by our SharePoint users and in this list, and it could have more columns than this, but this is just what we're going to use for an example. So our goal is to pull this into our tabular model within Power Pivot. I'm going to use Power Pivot for Excel to do this. So process would be the same in the Visual Studio environment. We have our spreadsheet. I have not started any Power Pivot model in here yet, but I'm going to do that by clicking on the Power Pivot window button, and that will bring up my Power Pivot for Excel. And from database, from SQL Server, we've used this several times already, but we're not going to use that feature. We're actually going to pull data from an external data feed. And this data feed is, we're going to call this US stores. And the data feed is basically, we put in the SharePoint URL, whatever the SharePoint site is, and then this VTI bin, and then the list data dot service. And this will give us access to all of the content that we can get to from within SharePoint that we could pull into Power Pivot or into a tabular model in Visual Studio through this dialog. If I just put that URL in and click Next, I'll get a list of all of the potential things that I could pull in from SharePoint. Now, not all of these will actually work. There are a couple of restrictions. The main one is that the source table or source list that we bring in has to have columns defined. Not everything you see here does have columns defined, so you can try some of these standard lists yourself, and some of them will come in like user information list would. Here's the US stores, though. That's the one that we're interested in. I can actually preview that and look at what data is in that list, and I can see that yes, that indeed is the list I'm looking for. There are many columns here I'm really not that interested in, and what we'll do is just pick store number, state, address, city, zip, and why not the store hours. Most of the other columns you see are owned by SharePoint and are used internally, and we're not that interested in them. And then I'll just need to hit the Finish button. And what's happening now is the Power Pivot model is querying SharePoint using my credentials and pulling that data into a table. I'll close now that that's done. And within my Power Pivot data model, I can see that I've pulled that data in. So if next week, next month, tomorrow, I needed to refresh this data, I could just hit the refresh button. The query goes to SharePoint again using stored credentials and pulls that data back into the model. And then from there, I can take that data and use my relationships and relate that to other tables that I could bring in. These are grayed out at the moment because this is the only table. But I have my store number, so I could easily bring in store sales information or forecasting or whatever I want, relate that to this information that I'm getting from SharePoint, and then from there complete the building of my model.